Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. This is your host, Rob Hort. Happy, as always, to be with you. And, of course, because it's Wednesday, I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban, who has a tendency to get salty when I forget to introduce him. But I introduced him that time.
I think it's
remembered.
Weird for the listeners to just all of a sudden hear some other voice and
Yeah.
you don't know where it's coming from.
That's
and
true.
You just forget to ignore to introduce me.
Yeah, well, that's true. I need to get better about that. I probably need to get better about a lot of things because sometimes we just jump into that's one thing I think sometimes I forget as like the content producer, I guess, is that the audience doesn't necessarily follow this stuff like as closely as I am. So I'm like down in the weeds here talking about things. And I think that's something I could probably work on. Constructive criticism, I could probably do a little bit better of explaining what it is we're talking about sometimes. Anyway, speaking of which, I'm going to do that right now. We're going to talk with a United States Senate candidate, Katrina Christiansen. She is a professor, engineering professor at the University of Jamestown. She got her master's degree in Iowa. She's from Nebraska originally, but now she's in North Dakota, and she's running for the Senate for the Democratic-NPL. And we're going to talk with her here in just a minute. Before we get started, though, of course, thanks, as always, for everybody who's listening. Lots and lots of downloads. Really appreciate that. However you're listening is great. However, if you subscribe to the podcast via, like, Spotify or something like that, you get notifications when there's new episodes, which, of course, that's what you want, right? You want to know when there's a new episode out. I do more new episodes Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Wednesdays are the day that Chad Oban joins me. And, of course, also, speaking of subscribing, you should also be a subscriber to the forum. They even gave me my own special URL to drive you folks to get you to subscribe. If you go to this URL, it's like 99 cents for 3 months, and then after that, I think it's like $10 a month. Inforum.news/port. Go there, subscribe. You get my content. You get Bison football content. You get University of North Dakota hockey content. You get local sports, local news, statewide news, regional news, all sorts of great stuff. All of our newspapers. You subscribe to one, you get them all. Inforum.news/port. Okay, now, capitalist stuff over. Let's talk to Katrina. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. So we're going to test that criticism thing you were talking about. Actually, I got my master's in undergrad at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and my PhD from Iowa State.
I'm getting fact checked right out of the.
I just was testing your ability to, take a little criticism.
Fair enough. I'm a college dropout, so what the hell do I know about all that stuff? Katrina, tell us why are you running for the United States Senate?
I'm running because I am deeply concerned about my community and my state not being represented. Hoeven really doesn't do or say anything for actual North Dakotans. He does a great job serving special interests. Most of the time, he really doesn't have to do or say anything. Mitch McConnell can tell him what to do. So he does a great job in that regard. So I'm pretty disappointed with the leadership that North Dakota is supposed to have, or the representation that we're supposed to have. I think it's essentially absent.
So it sounds to me, Katrina, Chad Oban here, that one of your criticisms is basically we deserve better. North Dakota deserves better. It also is very similar to Rick Becker is saying we can do better. Obviously, you guys are coming at it from different places and with different tactics and tone and that kind of thing. Can you dive a little bit deeper into, beyond just he's too representative of special interests, he doesn't have to do much. Can you get some specifics on things that you think he should be doing more of to represent North Dakota?
Well, I don't want to have to do his job for him, but I can tell you what I would do.
Perfect.
Which might be a little bit different than Rick Becker, right? I want to hear North Dakotans. I want to make North Dakotans feel like they're seen and that their problems matter, right? So he's not really focused on the things that we care about, right? And that's what I want to focus on: education, and not efficiency, but performance, right? Reducing healthcare costs, and again, improving performance. That's what engineers focus on. You know, there are a lot of people in the state of North Dakota that are concerned about the cost of childcare or the availability of childcare. Senator Hoeven never talks about those things. And when he talks about agriculture, he talks about it from a big ag processing point of view, right? Most of North Dakota's products leave the state as raw materials. And we really need value-added capacity in the state, right? It's way below where it should be. The last time that I was investigating this, right, North Dakota is the third largest ag producer in the United States behind California and Iowa, but we have a sixth of the value-added processing capacity. That means that like $3 to $4 billion worth of revenue is sent out of the state all of the time. So I think that that would be a big push from my end, and also innovating that value-added processing capacity. So sometimes, you know, we get locked into technologies and they're not very good. So just really bringing it back to keeping those resources in the state so that people here can thrive.
I mean, I think you're putting on some you're not going to get a lot of disagreement from me about those issues. Childcare costs are very high, and that's a real struggle for a lot of people. You know, we're actually having a debate right now. In fact, the last guest I had on this podcast was a state lawmaker from who was talking about the soybean crushing facility. There's a little bit of controversy. Some people don't want to build it near Castleton, but yet that's exactly the sort of thing that you're talking about, right? Where we're taking our raw commodities and we're doing value added, and we're adding more value to them before we ship them out of state. I agree with all those things, but how do you do those things as a United? I disagree with the idea that John Hoeven is not doing anything on these things. I think if you actually read through his press releases, he's done quite a bit. But to tell us a little bit, sticking with the theme of you're going to tell us what you're going to do, what would you do differently? I mean, as a United States Senator, how do you lower childcare costs?
Well, for example, you could look at some programs to expand childcare so that we already have federal programs, right, that provide childcare. So there are Head Start programs in the state. Looking to expand those. I would think that we should focus more on less school-like childcare programs and ones that are more focused on play. I think that that's really important for that age group from 0 to 5. And so looking at building on the framework that's there from Head Start and building it out so it includes more people. Obviously, it wouldn't necessarily be free, but subsidizing it for the people who need subsidies. And it's never wrong to invest in people. And I think that that's the distinction between somebody like me who sees value in investing in their neighbors and their community members, and Senator Hoeven, who is very focused on serving special interests. His press releases are not actions, right? They're just
they're announcing actions. I mean, I did a quick, and this is by no means a thorough review, but I did a quick Google search while you were talking, and here's a press release. Hoeven announces $2 million USDA loan for child care facility in Watford City. I mean, he's doing stuff.
That's great for Watford City. That is fantastic for Watford City. I have a friend that's moving to Williston, and childcare costs for her are going to be $3,000. But we need to serve all of the state. From Wapaton.
Yeah, I mean that was one announcement. Right? I mean, it's not like
yeah, and he serves on that committee, and sure. I mean that's wonderful for Watford City's residents. But there are a whole bunch of other people who would like to work, and having consistent, high quality childcare and that's affordable is hard. It's real. I don't think Hoeven understands how hard it is. That's why I'm running. And I also think that some of those things might, get through, right? But there are a lot of things that don't get through that could really benefit North Dakota, right? Because of the difference in how our parties approach problem solving, right? So if you wanted to think about, and I'm going to talk about 1990s Republicans, not this decade's Republicans, there used to be, the distinction was, we have a problem. How do we go about solving the problem? Traditionally, a democratic solution would be, we're going to structure this with a governmental solution. And the Republican solution would have been, we're going to use market-based mechanisms to fix this solution. And I think that divergence doesn't exist anymore. The Democrats are still offering government-based solutions. Now, are they flawed? Sure, you can make criticisms about that. I'll let you do that. That's fine. But I don't think that the other side of the aisle is really interested in solving problems.
So I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, I think we saw it when Obama was elected, and Mitch McConnell, I think, said his number one goal is to make sure Obama doesn't get reelected. I mean, that's not indicating a goal of moving the ball forward. One of the things that I'm hearing from you is the different perspective that you would bring to the U.S. Senate. I think both of the other candidates on the Republican side, Rick Becker and John Hoeven, are wealthy. They're male. And when you talk about not having to worry about or stress about making ends meet for childcare, paying your mortgage, or there is a different perspective. What do you think your different perspective would bring to the U.S. Senate that maybe John Hoeven currently or Rick Becker potentially, unlikely, would bring to the U.S. Senate, just because of your gender and frankly, I assume you're not rich. I don't know that, but I assume you're not.
I am not a rich person. I'm actually a first generation college student. So there, I'm going to, thank you, Chad, for pointing that out. Right. So one of the things that I think distinguishes me from the candidates isn't my gender, right? And isn't the fact that I'm a middle income American. It's that I'm an engineer. It's that I'm a trained problem solver, right? I am actually very good at looking at what are our objectives and how do you formulate a solution that will meet those objectives, right? I think that now on the side of being a community member that happens to have children in a community also adds another layer to that distinction, right? I know what it's like to have a child in school right now. Actually, I have 3 children in school. And that there were 2 main reasons that I decided to take on John Hoeven. And one of them is that our education system is woefully underfunded and inadequate to really provide the education that all of our students deserve. And, you could look to, somebody might say, well, why don't you run for the school board? You'd be so good on the school board. No, I'm not going to do that, because that's not where you're going to be able to change the trajectory, right? And you're looking at serious amounts of money in terms of being able to actually meet your objectives in an educational setting. So you need, and this isn't probably just due to the pandemic, but you need counselors, you need behavioral specialists, you almost need social workers in our school setting. And the funding at the state level isn't there. And I don't think that the representation is there that can bring light to these concerns, so that's a distinction. And the other reason that I decided to run is that I am a real person, in the sense that I don't have a lot of privilege that doesn't, keep me from kind of seeing how other people live. Second reason that I decided to do this was I called Hoeven's office in October when he was going to vote against the debt ceiling increase. And I wanted to know why. And the office told me, well, that he was concerned about inflation for North Dakotans. And, and that when we do get money, right, that it's worth more. Okay. So that to me made it very obvious that Hoeven doesn't really know what it's like to live on limited income or to be a person that has limited means and has to make decisions about medicine or gas or rent or food. He has had, he's a very wealthy, he's the 11th wealthiest or congressperson, right? Including Congress and Senate or House of Representatives there. That is $48 million worth of wealth is a lot. The average North Dakotan, family, I think is like 60,000 for income. There's a gap there in your ability to understand what our struggles are. And so when I say he's not working for North Dakotans, that's what I mean. He's buddied up with Rick Scott, who's worth $222 million. He's gotten a lot of PAC money from Mitt Romney, who happens to be also very wealthy, whose number doesn't, his wealth doesn't, I can't remember it right now, but I knew it a while ago because I was mad that I paid more.
Are you upset about any of the rich Democrats in the Senate, or is it only rich Republicans that make you upset?
No, I actually think that it's wealth on both sides of the aisle. Really,
because if you get elected to the Senate, you're going to be working with a lot of very, very rich Democratic senators, and I'm just wondering if and
they. I would challenge them when they get to points when they're not able to push the boulder up over the hill. That there are people who really need them to be able to. One of the things that I think. Hold on, I'm going to finish here. That is really problematic for Congress and the Senate is the institutional inertia, right? If you look at what Congress and Senate achieved in the 70s, up into the mid 80s, they were very effective as a legislative body, right? But if you, sorry about that, if you, the last 15 years in particular, since Bush's second, administration, they achieve very little, right? We essentially have a government that is in the past, right? Because all they do is continuing resolutions. I think that the debt ceiling stuff disables the bodies from actually governing.
I think there's a lot of reasons why we're not governing, and it's if you want me to expound about being frustrated with Republicans not being serious policymakers, I've got a book full of columns that I could give you to read. I'm frustrated about that too, but let me push back because I'm not. You're talking about being an engineer and you're a problem solver, but I'm not hearing a lot of specifics. And in fact, you said education funding. You want to be a United States Senator because of education funding. But that is, granted, we get federal grants and everything, but for the most part, funding schools is on the states, right? The states. And as a matter of fact, North Dakota, if you want to look, I looked up real quick per pupil spending by state 2022, and North Dakota per pupil spends more than Minnesota. We spend more than California. I would argue that maybe it's not a spending problem per se. And I don't know, maybe we could have a debate about that, but that just seemed odd to me that you're running for the United States Senate to fix a policy area that is by definition a state policy area. So Rob, I'm going to tell you that I'm running because I'm deeply concerned about how we're not being represented. So one of the two things that I said that gave me great concern that Hoeven wasn't doing that was that he doesn't know what it's like to be a regular North Dakotan. The second thing was that I'm deeply concerned about education. And the state is not going to allocate enough money to make up for the needs in schools, right? So you would need to reform Title I. And if you want me to be specific, this is me being specific, so that rather than giving schools over a certain poverty rate, which I believe
in the state right now is like 33%, just a little bit more money, like where my kids go to school, for example, there's about a 54% poverty rate. There are 2 other elementary schools in Jamestown that have about a 50% poverty rate. So those schools have Title I funds. It's about $786,000 that the district receives. So when I was investigating what other resources were available to really deal with some of the problems in my children's school, I found an expert in the Title I area that was incredibly helpful. And I was like, well, this really isn't a lot of money. This isn't going to go very far in terms of dealing with behavioral issues and counseling issues. And she said, well, I asked her as an expert what she recommended. And really what Title I should be doing is offering about 50% more than what the state offers, right? So at a school that might have 110 students, that would be about $500,000. You could bring on a counselor. You could bring on a behavioral specialist. There's learning loss in the classroom. And so, yes, that is the thing that motivated me, because the state's not going to do that because you think you're spending enough. Oh, we're spending $13,000. No, these schools right now have so many problems. We've already put so much stress on them that they don't have enough in resources. You can never spend enough in educating people and investing in them. And that's what I propose to do. And I think that the people who have children in North Dakota would not agree with the sentiment that there's enough there.
I don't know. Those people are also property taxpayers, and I think I know how North Dakotans feel about paying property taxes to fund things like schools. I mean, there's a balance. Yeah. The money comes from somewhere, right? I mean, at some point somebody's got to pay that bill.
And Rob, I would suggest, because of the state, we talk a lot about the per pupil payment, and it's $2 billion now, whatever, compared to just 10 or 20 years ago is $1 billion. It's a 1% increase last year. A 1% increase to our schools when they're dealing with the same inflation that everybody else is dealing with is really insignificant. I don't want to talk about state funding for public education, though, but I would like to.
And this is federal funding. That's the point. It's a priority. Education should be a priority, and so and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that mentality. If you were to go across the state and go to schools and see what resources are lacking, you might feel differently.
So I'm going to pivot us slightly. A pretty big event last night, the State of the State. My perspective is I thought President Biden did a really solid job talking about Ukraine. And one of the things that he did that I really liked was push back on some of the talking points, right? I mean, he said we need to fund the police. He said we have to secure the southern border, and sort of pushing back on those right-wing talking points. Interested in what your perspective.
Left-wing talking points, I think, to fund the police is not coming from the right.
But the right is saying that Biden wants to defund the police.
Well, because there's a lot. There's Democratic members of Congress who are saying that. So
Joe Biden has not said that, Rob.
No, he pushed back on it, which I think was your point.
Yeah, yes, that is my point. So, Katrina, I'm interested in your perspective on the speech last night. And secondly, if you were elected to the U.S. Senate, regardless of the president's party, would you go to the State of the State or State of the Union address?
Yes.
Would you attend?
Yes. I that's your job. Of course I would attend.
What were your thoughts on the speech?
I think that it was, it wasn't too long, but I think I actually have seen Biden speak. I had an opportunity to listen to him. And one thing that I find really endearing about him is how sincere he is. And so I think that when he was talking about the policy points that he had, he was sincere. When he was talking about standing with Ukraine and, our allies, he was sincere. And that sincerity, I think other people pick up on. And so, it really, lots of people are very critical of Biden's tenure so far. And, everybody can Monday morning quarterback, whatever. But he had a tremendous hole to dig us out of. And the thing is that he's still really positive, and he sees, that we can do this, and he's hopeful, and that hope is sincere. And so, I think that that's probably the thing that most people will remember from that. And, that he's a sincerely genuine American that loves this country, and he will serve it, and he is serving it.
Let me ask you this. I ask every time I interview a Democratic candidate for statewide office here, I ask pretty much the same question, because it's the obstacle every one of you face is, how do you overcome how toxic the Democratic brand is in the state of North Dakota? I mean, you have an electorate that has winnowed the Democratic caucus in the state legislature down to almost nothing. I mean, that's not for want of Democrats running. That's for voters consistently voting against them over and over again. Democrats, when was the last time Heidi Heitkamp, I guess, outside of that, the last time a Democrat held a statewide elected office in North Dakota was, Roger Johnson, Chad? Ag Commissioner?
Probably.
2008, I think. How do you...
2008, I think, was the last time he was elected.
Yeah. So how do you overcome that, Katrina? How do you speak to an electorate that leans Republican? I think it's fair to say that. How do you say, hey, I'm a Democrat, vote for me?
I think boldly. I think loudly. I don't think you shy away from it. I'm proud to be a progressive. There isn't a day that I wake up and think, oh man, I wish I was not so progressive. No, absolutely not. The reason that I'm out in this race is because Hoeven is not addressing the things that we really care about, that impact our daily lives. He just quotes Republican hot button issues. And I think that that's very effective, right? There are emotional responses to those things. I think that's, the thing that you have to overcome. And I think that you can potentially message on civic pride, right? And actually engaging with those that you're supposed to serve. I think that's a real problem with our delegation, is it's not about service. When you engage with them, do you feel like they're sincere about their representation and their service? No. I don't get that.
I can tell you, I guess, as a Republican who's been on a bit of a journey over the last year, or more than that, because Trumpism has left me behind. In fact, I wrote in a print column that published this morning, that John Hoeven, I was making the point, why is he facing this sort of Trump rebellion from the right? When his voting record, he voted against both impeachments. He voted against the January 6th commission. According to 538.com, he voted with Donald Trump more than 92% of the time. That's right on par with where Senator Kramer was. And I was trying to figure out what's got the Trumpies so upset with John Hoeven that they're challenging him for the primary. But, as a conservative, I'm looking at that track record of just sort of obscene. And that's something that makes me mad about John Hoeven is why are you voting against these impeachments? Why are you voting against the January 6th commission? I don't understand that. When did being a Republican mean being this sort of slavish devotion to a person? And I guess my question for you is, do you see that as an opportunity to hit Hoeven on? Admittedly, it's tricky because North Dakotans still like Trump, but it seems to me like there's an opportunity there over time where Trump is going to become a liability for them. Maybe it's not now, I don't know, but how do you deal with the Trump question?
So there were two questions there.
Yeah,
and I think that Hoeven's arrogant, right? He has immense wealth. You wrote that article that he might not consider going to the convention.
State convention.
How arrogant is that? How can he be your voice if he's not going to be there to listen to you, right? He really has taken the state's, I guess, comfortability with him familiarity with him for granted. He might have cared. I'm not sure he does anymore. His voting records, as those 3 votes in particular, I think the things that were more concerning to me were, one, that he voted against the disagreement with Trump to remove those Russian sanctions back in 2019. What's that about? Right? I mean, his own party is questioning his leadership.
Yeah.
So,
although for very different reasons than you are. So.
Well, and that's okay. I mean, we live in 3D space, right? So, it's easy to say left, right, or conservative, liberal, but it turns out, right, that you have, blue collar conservative, and you might have liberal working class, and then you obviously have the 2 groups that tend to rule Washington and not serve the people. I'm using that word specifically, that are incredibly wealthy, the elite conservative and the elite liberals.
Well, Katrina, I appreciate. Sorry. Go ahead, Chad. You got one more question?
Well, I was just one other thing. I think anytime you've got these 6-year terms where folks go off to Washington, it's really hard to stay connected. I don't think it's just been Hoeven. I don't think it's just been, Dorgan and Conrad. I think it's often the case that people go Washington, even if that's not sort of who they are. I think one of the reasons why Hoeven's having his problems right now within the Republican convention and activists is, not being involved for 4 or 5 years. The party moved and he wasn't here. He wasn't engaging them. Which, again, I don't think is abnormal for a U.S. senator. And one of my frustrations was when he tried to engage them, it was at the Stop the Steal rally in November at the state capitol, which I think, Rob, you mentioned in your column as well as another example, sort of
it's appeasement. It's appeasement.
They're never going to be with you if you're part of the establishment. So I don't think I have a question there. I just wanted to add to the list of things that maybe were frustrating. But Katrina, if you were elected to the Senate, how would you stay connected to the state over 6 years working in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I've given a lot of thought to that, Chad. Not just like if I were elected or when I'm elected, but that one of the problems that I think the Senate, not so much the House, I think suffers from, because they have to be reelected so often, is that they're not here, right? And how do you legislate that requirement, right? That would be the government solution. I don't know if there's a market-based one, but that they're here. People have asked me, well, are you worried about not being from North Dakota? And my roots are here. I have a home here. 2 of my children have been born here. I lived through the winter of 2013, 2014 here, right? Like I mean, if I didn't get my North Dakota stripes that winter, then I don't know. I don't, there's nothing worse ahead for me in that regard. But, I like being here. I like my house. I like my community. I want to be here. I think that's the distinction. The idea that Hoeven is somehow like a regular North Dakotan is just so bizarre to me. He went to Dartmouth. His peer group isn't here. He wants to be with other Ivy Leaguer multimillionaire. He's not going to be at a parade downtown hanging out with people. That's just not who he is. And I guess that's who I am. I mean, I love my community.
Well, Katrina, it was good to hear from you. You promised a half hour, and we got just a little bit more than that. So I certainly appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us today.
Well, Rob, thank you for having me. I really appreciated the opportunity, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your, I guess we're still in winter mode, so winter.
We'll just finished our interview with Katrina Christiansen, who is running for the United States Senate, and of course, you can check out more about her. She's not the only candidate in the Democratic field, though, for the Senate. We have a gentleman by the name of Michael Steele, who has a very, very interesting Twitter feed, I gotta say, Chad. I
was actually just made aware of Mr. Steele's Twitter feed earlier today. It's my understanding that I was made aware of it in the office, and I chose not to go to the Twitter feed while in the office.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. You're going to run into some filters. Let me I've never before on this podcast had to do a not safe for work tag warning. But yeah, if you go to his Twitter feed, you're going to see some stuff that's not safe for work. So I don't know that he's a very serious candidate. Katrina's interesting though. I give a lot of credit to anybody who jumps in this ring, because it's tough. And even interviewing, like, you can kind of tell they're a little rough around the edges, and I don't want to, I don't want to pounce, right? I don't want to come off like a jerk and like pounce on stuff. But, the one thing that kind of I came out with, I wish she had more, because she was telling me a lot, well, I'm an engineer and I'm about solutions. And it's like, well, okay, let's hear the solutions. Because so far what you're telling me is that John Hoeven's too rich to be in the United States Senate. And I don't know. That leaves me cold.
Yeah, and so I think that I often, and I will give it to Katrina as well, a bit of a pass on the policy specifics. I think as we get into this race a little bit, she'll probably, have more of those.
Sure.
I thought her response on Title I and how Title I dollars would help education funding shows that she does have some grounding sort of on how to use the federal government to help with the state issues she cares about. I think the one thing about John Hoeven being rich and Dartmouth and some of that kind of stuff, I don't know how well that plays. But if she's going to be able to make the connection of he doesn't understand us, he doesn't understand what it's like to worry about paying your mortgage and your childcare bill and all those kind of things, I think she has to talk about his wealth. She has to talk about sort of his sort of even perception of elitism if she wants to gain any ground here. I'm not suggesting that I think it's going to be effective, but I do think there's something to be said about connecting to everyday North Dakotans who have to worry about paying those bills and making ends meet, and maybe it's harder for him to relate to.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. So let's talk about State of the Union last night. I'll be honest. I kind of don't like the State of the Union. There's so much stagecraft and everything else that goes into even the outburst last night. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, congresswomen. That was planned, right?
They clearly went in and decided at some point we're going to burst out and yell something about this. They chose to do it while he was talking about his deceased son, which is really interesting timing.
Yeah, I thought that was repugnant beneath the dignity of the office, and we could talk about that though, because I think I wrote a column today where I think that sort of thing, there's a market for it. There's people who like that. Much as there was a market for Nancy Pelosi ripping up Donald Trump's speech, behind him during that. That stuff too. I just stop it. Just stop it.
So, Rob, what do you think about, I was thinking about watching the speech last night, and there's just so much analysis of who's clapping for what, and why are the Republicans not standing up for bipartisanship? There's a few different points where the Republicans were booing, and then the Democrats are sort of pointing over at them and whatever. How about we make it like a presidential debate where nobody can cheer, nobody can boo? It's just give the speech,
like the Supreme
Court, what he's saying.
Or like the Supreme Court justices who have to sit there like statues and not do anything at all.
And the military guys.
Because if they sneeze or something, then it's going to get analyzed to death. The whole thing is just, it's like everything. It's like a microcosm for everything that's wrong in American politics, where we obsess over these inane details that really don't matter, and then miss the whole flipping point of the exercise.
I'll tell you, one of my frustrations coming out of the speech last night, I thought his stuff on Ukraine was really strong. Having the ambassador there was really strong. Yeah. That's something that should bring Americans together.
Sure,
right?
and
this is a no-brainer.
I don't want to be like that. That's the obvious stuff to do. And I think maybe Biden's getting a lot of credit for it because of what we just went through with Trump. Right? Like that stuff's low-hanging fruit, but I give Biden credit for getting back to it, right? Like that's how the American president's supposed to behave.
But my frustration is the reflexive response from politicians to the speech. Kevin Cramer, John Hoeven, Kelly Armstrong, Doug Burgum, they had their responses written before they read the speech.
Yep.
It was
fired out, because they dropped in my inbox.
Yeah, too much spending, over-regulation, shutting down. I mean, it's just like the same old, maybe a little nuance, maybe a little bit of thoughtfulness. I mean, I feel like their comms directors should maybe not get paid for putting out those releases.
Like maybe listen to the speech first. I don't know. But they all do it. I mean, Democrats do it, Republicans do it. Everybody knows. And that was to my point that it's all stagecraft, right? You may as well be watching a stage production because everything, from what the president does or says to, about the only unscripted thing is if one side surprises the other, like when Boebert shouts out or something and maybe you'll get a unscripted response from somebody. But I mean, for the most part, it's such bunk and I hate the whole thing. And if you look at the polling, most people don't watch. It really doesn't change anything. I don't even know how important it is. I mean, political nerds like us watch it and talk about it, but the general public, I don't think they care.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and I think even political nerds forget about it in a couple of weeks about what happened. But again, I point to the Ukraine thing, and I'm longing for something that can bring this country together. It may be low-hanging fruit. It might make him look good because the previous guy was so terrible at it.
Putin's doing a pretty good job so far.
Absolutely. He's doing a great job of bringing people together.
Uniting America, uniting the West, quote unquote. Yeah. We're not reuniting, some of those old NATO alliances. I mean, that's really interesting. But let's talk about the market for outbursts at the State of the Union and that sort of thing, because I mean, it's there. So because it was so interesting because I had planned to write a column today based off a Tioga Tribune article that I read about a remarkable NDGOP district meeting in District 2 up in the northwest corner of the state, Tioga, obviously. And and then last night I'm watching the State of the Union. So you get Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's trying to start the Build the Wall chant. You have Lauren Boebert who's screaming something about the soldiers in Afghanistan, and I mean there's a market for that sort of belligerence, right? So then we go, and here's Rick Becker, right? And this is, by the way, I would go to the Tioga Tribune. It's a article by Jacob Orledge. And you really got to read. I have it linked in my column if you want to go from there. You really have to read this thing because, I mean, Becker's up in front of these people and he's talking. He's going to bring a bare knuckle approach to the United States Senate. This is a direct quote. He says, "People need to go to jail. For God's sakes, they need to go to jail." And then you had a guy jump up, and this wasn't even just some rando. This is a talk radio host on KTGO, which is a radio station owned by Scott Hennon's group or business or whatever it is. So he works with Scott Hennon. He's also the economic development director for the city of Tioga. He stands up and he says that the putting people in jail is not enough. He wants the death penalty, right? For the quote unquote it's all the usual stuff. It's the deep state. Becker's going to reopen investigations into the 2020 election, all down the road. So everybody's cheering and hooting and hollering, and that's what Becker's serving up, right? Which is, first of all, it's kind of surprising because Becker kind of paints himself. I'm this libertarian guy. I'm pro-liberty, but also let's have mass arrests of the political opposition. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, Rob, first thing I'd say, shout out to the Tioga Tribune. This is about the third time I think you and I have talked about different Tioga Tribune articles on these podcasts.
The Tioga Tribune's a good paper. I mean, we have a lot of good small town notes, but don't get me wrong.
Yep.
And I read a lot of them. The Tioga Tribune's really, really good content.
Yeah, but we likely wouldn't be talking about this if that reporter wasn't in Tioga, if there wasn't a Tioga Tribune.
Local journalism matters.
Yeah, so, I agree with sort of the audience for this. I made the mistake of watching the Bismarck Public Schools school board meeting the other day where the public was there talking about, kids dressing up as animals and, making up stories about there being litter boxes in public schools. And there is an audience for this sort of craziness. And people just believe whatever they read on the internet or what Scott Hennon tells them. But the idea that we should start arresting people who are in the deep state and as if the bureaucracy is some terrible deal. And you and I talked about it before we went on air. That district is sending like 100 people to the state convention to be delegates.
93 or 94, something like that.
And how many of those people are going to vote for John Hoeven? I'm guessing it's not many.
Yeah.
Well, and so I think, going back to last week's podcast, if you're John Hoeven and you're thinking about skipping the convention, those are the guys that are going to stand up and start screaming craziness at you. It's the Boberts of North Dakota who are going to stand up during your nomination speech and, call you a liar or, all other crazy things, say you should be thrown in jail because, I don't know what John Hoeven is doing wrong for these folks. But yeah, there's an audience for this. It's landing with people. It's people like Rick Becker taking advantage of people who maybe don't understand the depth of these issues and believe everything they're told. But it's a scary situation, in my opinion.
Well, this was the other part from the district from Orledge's article. Kathy Nessett was there. Hoeven wasn't at this particular convention. There was another, because a lot of these district conventions, they end up holding them on the same night to the same day. The candidates can't make them to all of them. So Hoeven was off at another one. He had Kathy Nessett there. Kathy Nessett's from Tioga, very well-known figure in state politics, very successful woman in the oil industry, very well-known person, particularly in that community. So she's standing up in front of this audience. And she says, she's making a case for John Hoeven as a statesman, right? Making a case for him as a negotiator, as a deal maker, which I think is fairly his strong suit. So she's making that case. This is what she says. She goes, there's a fair amount of effectiveness that happens when you can be a statesman in addition to a politician. There are times when you have to give a little, when you have to negotiate. That's what she tells the crowd. This is what Ulrich reports as the response. Along with murmurs of disagreement, a handful of outright boos erupted before one man in the back shouted in response, "You can't sell yourself to the devil." So that's someone saying, well, John Hoeven's a statesman, and then people booing saying, we don't want a statesman, right? What we want, I guess, is Marjorie Taylor Greene heckling the President of the United States during a State of the Union speech.
I think that goes back to something that that Katrina had said during the interview. Is this today's GOP in this country, in this state? Their goal is to do nothing. Their goal is to do nothing because
it's a faction of the GOP. I think that's.
Well, we'll see. Who is the GOP? It's the delegates that show up at the state convention, right? Yeah. That's who the GOP is. At some point, we need to stop suggesting that this is such a small faction.
We don't know how big the faction is. I think this election cycle's going to tell us, but I'm looking more at the June primary because you're talking about the school board, I'm talking about these local ND GOP meetings, and the flavor that we're getting out of these things are the people who show up. I don't think the people who showed up to speak to the Bismarck school board represent the general public, and I don't think the people who are showing up.
Though, is the North Dakota GOP is a private organization, just like the North Dakota Democratic-NPL is. The people who show up at the convention are the people who represent everybody in this state, in the North Dakota GOP. That's what their bylaws say. That convention is what determines the fate of that state party. So if the delegates that show up think Rick Becker represents the North Dakota GOP better than John Hoeven, that means the North Dakota GOP thinks Rick Becker is better than John Hoeven. Primary be damned, but at some point, that organization is no longer representing the voters in North Dakota if this is what their delegates choose to do. Because that is who the party is.
That's what we've been talking about, right? Do these local conventions, do the state conventions really represent the larger North Dakota electorate? Particularly, and granted it's an open primary, but the people who are picking the Republican ballots at the primary generally, I think of themselves as Republicans, and they matter too. But you're right. I'm not discounting your point though, because it's a good one, and it's one I feel like I've been making over and over again. Is what do Republicans stand for now? If not, like we can't even agree that statesmanship is a good thing. Like that's gonna get booed. What do we stand for?
And you think about, Jack Dalrymple. You think about Doug Burgum. You think about all these statesmen and women that have been elected to Republican office in this state. The fact that we would discount their skills to get things done. If you're the governor of North Dakota trying to get something through the legislature, you damn well better be ready to negotiate, because you're not going to get everything you want. Or and
that was true. That was true even when John Hoeven was governor.
Yeah. But if you think you're going to get everything you want and you're just going to pout in the corner until you do, you're not going to get a whole heck of a lot done.
Right. Well, that's the problem with a lot of them is they just think we won the election, so everything's gonna go our way now, and it doesn't work that way. But and the thing that frustrates me about so much of this is, I mean, you look at the issues, right? So you look at like what Rick Becker's talking about, the deep state, right? I don't believe in the deep state conspiracy theories, but I do believe in such a thing as bureaucratic inertia. And I think it's right that conservatives should talk about that. That's a real problem. Everything from the Pentagon sometimes being far too entrenched in their wartime policy down to, the staff at the local school district that maybe doesn't like and is a little bit resistant to what their school board's telling them to do. That's a problem everywhere. And I'm not saying, but bureaucrats are bad people. It's just, it's a human nature to kind of see the world through your own little, that's a real problem, right? I call it bureaucratic inertia. I don't think it's the deep state. I don't think it's people twirling their mustaches trying to do anything evil. I think it's just human nature, right?
Human beings being human beings.
Human beings being human, and it's something we sometimes have to overcome. People get a little too entrenched in their views, a little too entrenched, a little too comfortable in their positions, and sometimes you got to shake things up. I think it's right and proper that conservatives should be talking about that, but the problem is, the way a lot of conservative people call themselves conservatives, like Rick Becker, are talking about that now, is it's the deep state. And we got to put people in jail and put people in prison. That makes it hard for me to say, well, bureaucratic inertia is a real problem, because now it's like, oh, Port's talking about the deep state. No, I'm not. I'm talking about a real problem, a reasonable problem that exists. Or talking about, build the wall, build the wall. Southern border security is a real issue. It is a real issue that needs to be solved. And Congress has been kicking the can down the road, and presidents have been kicking the can down the road for too long. But the thing is everybody's focused on this damn wall that we can't talk about anything else.
And you're right about the southern border. I mean, Democrats, Republicans, presidents, Congress, everybody's been kicking the can to get this thing done. But the build the wall, it's simple. It's easy for people to understand. Part of me wishes Democrats would have just built the damn wall just to show that it wasn't going to be an effective strategy to do everything to deal with immigration. But,
just give them the wall, right? Yeah. It's just a wall. And even Lauren Boebert, like the comments that she made about Afghanistan. You can criticize our withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's plenty to criticize there, right? But if you're going to shout it at the president in the middle of a speech, and like accuse him while he's trying to talk about his son dying, like, you're not going to get a lot of sympathy for your argument. So, which to me just means that they're just glomming onto, and the really.
But Rob,
sorry.
She's getting so much press today. I guarantee she's raising money off of it.
Of course.
She's raising her star. She decides to quit Congress in 2 to 4 years. She gets to go on Fox News or OAN or something like that and continue to be really popular.
That was, I actually kind of wished that I had asked, and this is my fault, I wish that I had asked Katrina the question, because she was talking about being more in touch with the people. And that's a fine thing to say. And obviously, elected officials need to be responsive and accountable to the people. But at what point, where do you draw the line to where you don't become a reactionary, right? Because why does John Hoeven vote against both impeachments, right? Why does John Hoeven vote with Donald Trump 92% of the time? Why does he show up at the Stop the Steal rally and a lot of this other stuff? Why does he do that? And I think that's Hoeven being a reactionary, right? That's Hoeven being unwilling to stand up to his own base and say, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
Well, I think it's interesting, the trajectory of any U.S. Senate term, that they often become much more reactionary, much more responsive to these sort of flare-ups the last 2 years of their term. I think it's easy for them to go to Washington for the first 4 years, dive in, whatever, and not be reactionary. And then it gets to be election time and they get nervous. And
I remember back when Conrad and Dorgan were in office, this publication, I don't even know if it's still around, Congressional Quarterly. I don't even know if they're still around, but they used to do a liberal conservative index of how the members voted of the House and the Senate, and the senators in particular. Pomeroy was always kind of a flat line, which made sense because he's on the ballot every time. But Dorgan and Conrad, very, very liberal, voting alongside the very liberal counterparts in the Democratic caucus, for the first 3-4 years of their, and then come the last 2 years they'd start coming back towards the middle, like they all do it, right? I mean, Hoeven's probably the same way. In a lot of ways.
I think it's the nature of the 6-year terms, and when you don't have to worry about what's going on back home as much because you're not on the ballot, it's easy. I mean, I see Kelly Armstrong around North Dakota all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, constantly. And it's a nature of, being up every 2 years. And I mean, Kelly's family being here too probably plays a role in that.
Well, Kevin Kramer's family's here. John Hoeven's family, he's from Minot. I've run into John Hoeven in the grocery store, by the way. I mean, North Dakota's a very special place in that those people are a lot more, I mean, we're grading on a scale. Believe me, those people are a lot more accessible. I've been driving around Bismarck. I ran into Kevin Kramer and his family at Charlie's in Minot. They were here with their son for a soccer tournament. So,
well, and I see the Kramers all the time as well around town.
So I mean, they're in town a lot.
So I take back all that credit I gave to Kelly. Everybody does it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how we get by. Although I will say I agree with you. Biden pushing back on stuff like defund the police, right? That is coming from the left-wing base. It is ludicrous. It makes no sense. It's a slogan. As a practical matter of policy, it's absurd. And he pushed back on it. And, I mean, good on him for that. Still not going to vote for him probably. But will it matter, right? Because you still have a group of people yelling defund the police and then sending out their fundraising emails and making a bunch of money.
And then people saying, look, that's what Democrats want, is to defund the police.
And the same way Rick Becker says, put them all in jail and then, donate to my campaign or sign up to be a delegate for me at the NDGOP convention, which really, I mean, it's a lot of what's plaguing this is a bottom-up problem right now. I don't think that's always been the case throughout American history, but in a lot of ways, it's a bottom-up problem because we have a very loud faction of people who are pushing everybody around.
But I also think, and we talked about this, I think, last week, that I think elected officials do have to take some ownership in terms of you have to be responsive to your constituents, but at some point you have to say, I just got a fundraising email from Kevin Kramer, who is, if his staff listens to this show, I'm probably going to get removed from his list, that was talking about Biden sending crack pipes out to people as part of something, and I didn't understand it, but it's been blown so out of proportion, but there was like a line item in like the health services budget or something. There was a real thing where it was kind of like a needle program, but they were going to give people crack pipes so that they didn't light themselves on fire trying to use the drug. Now, admittedly, that's very controversial. Needle programs are very controversial. But Rob, when you simplify things to Biden sending a crack pipe to everybody,
right? Exactly.
Rather than saying
that is not a fair characterization. We can have a debate about whether or not the federal government should be funding crack pipes, but it was like a $250,000 grant to some, it was a very small amount of money, but that's what, I mean, the problem is cable news gets listen, I worked in talk radio. That's what we call a talker, right? You go out there, well, these idiots are funding crack pipes. What do you think about that? 701-293-9000, call in. That was the WDAY call-in number, by the way.
But then you have U.S. senators who then email out that talker to 30,000 people in the state saying, can you believe this is happening? Why would they not believe a U.S. senator that Joe Biden has given a crack pipe to every person in the state?
I keep hoping, because we're in this age right now where everybody is just sort of myopically on Facebook and Twitter, and everybody's kind of in the throes of these algorithms that are just constantly these outrage machines, right? And I keep waiting for the day when it's going to shift. And the cool thing to do is not to be outraged at every little clickbait thing that comes through your feed or that ends up on talk radio. But the cool thing is going to be to find the truth behind it and be like, why are you freaking out about this? This is nothing. Let's
be clear, Rob, in my book, that already is the cool thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But except you and I are not cool. I don't know if my 14-year-old's looking at me as I'm recording this right now. She knows I'm not cool.
Someday she'll figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know. We're not cool. And that's, again, that's why I say it's a bottom-up problem. I think both sides are reacting to the base. There is such a thing. One thing Katrina said was how effective everything was in the 90s or even back in the 70s. I think those are the two eras that she mentioned. And the thing is, what was true back then is there was a lot of partisanship. Right? The political parties were very, very strong, and they could enforce order and they could enforce decorum, and they're not anymore. They can't enforce. There's no enforcement. Nobody's keeping people in line anymore. What we need, and nobody wants to hear this, what we need is more partisanship.
Well, and you know, I don't know that I'm going to go as far as saying we need more partisanship.
Maybe that's the wrong term, but
yeah, when you have the Boberts, is it Bobert? Is that how you say her name?
I don't know. I read. I don't watch or listen to anything. I read everything, so I pronounce things funny sometimes. So
in Marjorie Taylor Greene and those kind of folks, you know, they do this stuff. They don't get reprimanded, but Kinzinger and Cheney,
Liz Cheney,
you know, they get kicked out of leadership and censured and whatever.
Marjorie Taylor Greene and that other congressman from Arizona, Paul something. Gosar. They were just at a white nationalist rally. They were literally at the rally of a guy, organized by a guy who denies the Holocaust. And they're not going to get censured by the party, right?
And her response, like, you know, I just wanted to go in there and talk. There's a group of young people who are active, and I wanted to be...
So are the Hitler Youth, right? It doesn't mean you should be in there handing out flyers. All right.
But doesn't that say something about the state of the GOP right now? That Kinzinger, Cheney, bad. These two are acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the thing. I mean, so the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy comes out and he says, you know, their attendance was unacceptable, right? Now I'm a student of words because I write words for a living. Saying that something is unacceptable and then doing nothing about it tells me that it's acceptable.
Yep.
Right? Like if you don't strip their committee assignments, you don't take some other action. I mean, understanding they're elected officials and they're accountable. You know, you can't just unilaterally remove them from office. But I mean, if you say it's unacceptable and then you do nothing, then it's acceptable. Like that's what that means.
Well, and Rob, I mean, the idea that Mitt Romney and Janice Cheney, Romney and Cheney are the people that all Democrats are like, finally somebody's standing up to the Republicans. I mean, think like if you go back in time or like move forward, like an ice age sort of situation where you just woke up today after and fell asleep 10 years ago and you see a bunch of Democrats saying Cheney and Romney.
Yeah.
What is happening?
Right. Like Dick Cheney's like when he went with Liz Cheney to the to Congress and like all the Democrats are lining up to shake his hand. And I will say that because I've been laughing as a conservative all these years. Because you used to see the emails that I've been getting, Chad, of late, from people I have seen write terrible things about me on social media. And now they're sending me emails being like, I really like your columns. You're so thoughtful. It's like, boy, the Trump era really put a lot of things into perspective, right? Like maybe those of us who are on opposite sides of the issue on a debate over Medicare or abortion or those types of issues, maybe we weren't the monsters to one another that we thought that we were. And
you're just wrong on things. It doesn't mean you're a monster.
Right. Like you just don't like my position. Fine. That's fine. That's, you know, I just like, I think so many of us are longing just to get back to the days where, you know, but yeah, when Mitt Romney ran for president, he was a plutocratic, right, misogynistic, terrible person. Like, look at Paul Ryan, right? Drummed out of politics for right? And the Democrats at one point were, he wants to push old ladies off the cliff. But now, you know, when the Trump era came around, then maybe he wasn't so bad. It's what a time to be alive.
And you and Romney have something in common, right? Because didn't Romney like put his family dog up on the roof? And didn't you and your family lose your dog?
So this is one of the things that we have to explain now so everybody knows what we're talking about. Not that long ago, Charles Tuttle and State Senator Jason Heitkamp. Charles Tuttle's kind of one of the Bastiat ringleaders, I guess. We had lost our dog like 6 years ago, I'm forgetting now. And she was gone for like 2-3 weeks in the dead of winter. Like it was like really, really cold. We thought she was gone forever, but we spent weeks driving around. We kept getting like feeling like social media, because this is such a North Dakota thing, right? Like we post, we lost our dog. Everybody in North Dakota shares the post, right? Like it's everywhere. Like people in other towns were like pray for Molly, right? Like it was kind of a great thing. But then years later, that popped up in somebody's memories. Like, oh, look at what Port did to his dog. He hates dogs. Like, I lost my dog, right? And like Mitt Romney's family, I think, kept the dog in the kennel or something. On
the roof,
right? Terrible thing. I'm sure he felt terrible, but that could happen to anybody, right? I mean, why are we? So anyway, yeah, that's the whole thing. Well, that's it for this show. Ending on that
strong
anecdote.
Finish. Strong finish to the podcast.
Strong finish today on the podcast. Let's see what's coming up. I don't know what's coming up. We got something coming on Friday. I don't know what yet, but y'all just have to tune in. And don't forget to subscribe to the forum inforum.news/port. Go there, 3 months for 99 cents. If you want to keep this podcast alive, you want to keep people like me pressing keys on the keyboard, if you want to fund the sort of journalists who go to district committee meetings and bring you news and tell you what's going on, then subscribe to your local paper. Maybe it's our paper, maybe it's the Tioga Tribune, whatever. Find them, subscribe to them, they're worth supporting. Chad, as always, we'll talk to you. Well, not next week. You're going to go to Arizona and not watch baseball.
Man,
you're going
tough.
for how tough to organize a spring training trip, and then the owners decide, no baseball.
Yeah, the amount of anger I've had over the last 48 hours at Major League Baseball owners is something. I'll tell you that for a variety of reasons.
I'll tell you, like normally I think there's plenty, there's plenty of criticism to go around for owners and players in baseball generally, but right now this is so totally on the owners. It's ridiculous.
All on the owners.
Well, on that note, we're gonna go. Chad, thanks as always.
All right, thanks, Rob.
Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.